So, when you think about who actually runs a country, who pops into your head? Is it that one famous face you always see on the news? Or is it something bigger? Maybe a huge unseen machine working behind the scenes? Well, today we're going to pull back that curtain on the executive branch and figure out who's really running the show.
Right? Is it a president, a prime minister, maybe even a king? Or could it be someone else entirely? Someone working away from the cameras? This is such a crucial question because the answer tells us where the real power to get things done actually lives. Okay, so let's get on the same page with a quick definition. The best way to think of the executive is as the action arm of the government. I mean, the legislature can debate and pass all the laws they want, but the executive, they're the ones who actually make it all happen. They're the branch that runs the country day in and day out.
Now, here's where it starts to get really interesting. The executive isn't just one single thing. Nope. It's actually made up of two very different but totally essential groups of people. So, on one side, you have the political executive. These are the faces we all know, right? The elected leaders who are in the spotlight for a few years. But then you have the non-political executive. These are the permanent civil servants. Think of them as the impartial experts, the ones who provide the stability and deep knowledge to keep the whole government running long after the politicians are gone. They are the true engine room. This all leads to a fascinating question. Does all of this executive power have to be in the hands of just one person? You might think so, but the answer is a definite no. Let's take a look at a couple of different ways this can be structured. In what's called a single executive system, like you see in the United States, pretty much all executive power is concentrated in one person, the president. But a lot of countries do it differently. In a plural executive system, that power is actually shared among a group, like the Swiss Federal Council. It's just a brilliant reminder that there's more than one way to design a country's leadership. Okay, so we've got a handle on who makes up the executive. But what do they actually do all day? You might think the answer is simple. They execute laws. But trust me, their job description is way more diverse than that. In fact, it's like the executive wears at least four very different hats: an administrative one, a legislative one, a financial one, and, maybe the most surprising of all, a judicial one. So let's break down what each of these really means. First up, the most obvious hat: administrative. This is their core function, their bread and butter. We're talking about implementing laws, appointing key officials, and managing foreign affairs. From negotiating treaties all the way to acting as the supreme commander of the military, this is the day-to-day work of running the country.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Hold on a second. Making laws? I thought that was the legislature's job. And you know what? You're right, it is. But the executive has a surprisingly powerful role to play in that whole process, which brings us to their second hat.
Let's see how this works. In parliamentary systems, the cabinet is actually part of the legislature, which means most of the bills that end up becoming law actually start with them. And in presidential systems, even with that separation of powers, the president can still heavily influence what happens with legislation through messages to Congress, the huge power of the veto, and even by calling for special sessions. So the key takeaway here is they don't just execute laws, they really help shape them from the get-go.
The third hat is financial. And wow, is this one huge. The executive is responsible for putting together the entire national budget. That document basically sets all the country's priorities for the whole year. And in parliamentary systems, this power is so fundamental that if the legislature rejects the budget, the entire government can fall. That's how important this is.
And finally, we get to the fourth hat, judicial. This one might honestly be the most shocking. The head of the executive often holds powers that feel, well, judicial in nature. We're talking about the ability to grant pardons or clemency, directly stepping into the justice system. That is a lot of power. So, we've unpacked the who, the what, and the how of the executive branch. But let's bring all this theory back to the real world. Why should any of this actually matter to you?
Because this isn't just some abstract political science lesson, right? The budget they create, that funds the roads you drive on and the schools in your community. The foreign policy they shape, that can mean the difference between global peace and war. The laws they execute affect your rights in your daily life every single day. The decisions made by this action arm ripple out and touch every last one of us. And that leaves us with one final, absolutely critical question. We need the executive branch to be powerful enough to actually get things done, to be effective. But how do we balance that power with accountability? Figuring out how to make sure this powerful action arm works for the people, not just over them.
That's one of the central challenges of any democracy. And it's a question we should all be